Advanced Workplace Associates, we're a management consultancy. We work with organisations to help them to deliver workplace changes. A lot of the projects we work on are around the delivery of agile working. But we also do a lot of work around personal development for people in the real estate and FM disciplines. We run some training and we run some networking groups to help to support people going through the sorts of agile journeys as well. And our research is also developing our understanding of some of the questions we think have remained unanswered in the world of workplace and work. And so hence the research into what we called cognitive fitness, and this is really all about our brains, the way our brains work and what our brains need to be their best every day in the office. So I'm going to share the results of the research with you, but first of all I'm going to ask you a few questions. So I'd like you all to stand up. I know you've only just walked in. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about how you're feeling, and this is really in the context of how your brain's working, how well sort of coordinated you are, whether you're able to focus and concentrate and all of that sort of stuff. So I'm going to ask you a few questions and then we'll move on and I'll share the results of the research with you. So, did you get a good night's sleep last night? Yes. If you didn't, then... Sorry, if you did, sit down. I'm trying to get this around. So, if you did get a good night's sleep, sit down. Okay. Right. Did you eat breakfast this morning? Yes. If you did, sit down. Have you done any exercise today? Anything before you arrived? No?
20-minute walk to the station.
Okay, so sit down. So you're all in a good position at the moment, aren't you? Have you drunk any water since we started today?
Yes.
Yeah, all doing well. Okay. Do you feel too hot or too cold? Are you generally comfortable? Okay, good stuff. Have you had a coffee?
Yes.
See, by this point, we usually got a few people standing who've not done any of those things, but you guys look like you're pretty well set. So, and we're not too far away from lunch either, so you'll be catching up with some of your nutrition in a while. So that's kind of giving you a bit of a hint of some of the things that we're going to be talking about. Now, the thought about our brain and our brain functions are really all about, how do we get the extra bit of effort and attention out of our brains as we go to work every day. We kind of felt that there were probably some things that weren't understood in terms of the way the brain works and what the brain needs to be its best every day. A lot of the focus around this sort of stuff is around well-being and physical health. We wanted to really understand what makes a difference for the brain. And before I go on to summarise some of the things that we found, just to give you a sense of why our sponsors were interested in this sort of research. We had a number of sponsors across some different sectors, a couple of financial services organisations, including the Royal Bank of Scotland, professional services company BDO, a couple of furniture manufacturers, all steel in the US and Chinarps in the UK, Sodexo, the FM service provider, and a company called My Cognition, who do a lot of work in terms of brain function, particularly in terms of people whose brains aren't particularly working well. So they have a lot of diagnostic tools and ways for which people can understand what's going on with their brains in order to try to improve performance. And the sponsors were interested because, again, they wanted to see, what are we doing already? Do people understand why we're doing the things that we're doing? And do they understand the ways in which these things can make a difference? because some services you might provide because you think that they are beneficial, they're a good employee proposition, but actually some of them actually make a significant impact on the way people can think and focus and concentrate in the office. So we wanted to shine a bit of a spotlight on this stuff so that people could understand it in a different context. So, a number of the things I talked to you about we'll come to in a second, but we wanted to look at this in the context of the way the brain works, and it's a pretty big subject, and I don't have very long. So I wanted to share this model with you. It was developed by MyCognition, one of our sponsors, and it looks at 4 different domains of the brain, the way the brain, the types of activities that the brain is required to do in any given day. And we've got a couple of different aspects of memory. So we've got the episodic memory, so linking things, recalling things into your memory in order to use them. The working memory, things the memory that you use for working things out and doing things like problem solving. We've got what they call the executive function, which is all around decision making. Then we've got speed and accuracy, so how quickly and accurately you can perform a task. And most important of all, probably, the thing which really overlays them in my mind is the ability to concentrate and focus. And if you think about your day-to-day working lives, when you're trying to focus and concentrate at work, how easy is it? What are all the things that are going on around you in terms of noise, task interruptions, all of those sorts of things that stop you from focusing on the job in hand. So if you bear those activities in mind, as what we did was we tried to, when we went through the research, we mapped all of the different factors to these different domains of the brain to help us to understand what impacts what. So going back to those questions that I asked you at the start, you'll recognise some of the pictures from that original exercise. So breakfast is obviously one of the most important things. It's the one that your mother always told you, eat breakfast at the beginning of the day. Well, it really does make a difference. We found that through the research. And there are a number of other things which we didn't touch on in that early opening exercise. Things like interruptions at work. That's obviously, it's obvious to me, it's very significant in terms of your brain's ability to stay focused and for you to concentrate on the task in hand. And in fact, we found through the research that typically people tend to swap topics and subjects that they're focusing on every 3 minutes. The myth of multitasking, the pursuit of multitasking is really not a good one, because you end up, I don't know what you feel, but if I try to multitask, and there's that old adage, isn't there, women can multitask and men can't. Well, actually, if you try to do several things at the same time, you probably do each one of those less well than it deserves, or that you really could do if you focused. Noise is a big one, speech particularly. And the worst of all is overhearing half of a telephone conversation. Because your brain, it's called the half-a-log in research terms, your brain is trying to fill in the gaps of what the rest of that conversation sounds like. And you'll have experienced this on the train, the desire to go and really hit somebody who's going at it on the phone. And your brain, much though you're not interested and you're trying not to concentrate or to focus on that conversation, it's almost more than your brain can cope with. It's just another task it's having to do to try to imagine what that phone call sounds like. So that's a quick summary of the factors. Now, in terms of the research findings, this is, I don't know how well that you can read this stuff. Can you read what's in the bubbles reasonably well? This diagram is showing all of the major factors that we found through the research. And there's a number of different things which are shown in that diagram. So the green versus the red is a positive versus negative, so the green ones have a positive effect. The size of the circle denotes the evidence base. So how much evidence was there, how much research was there went into that finding. The depth of the colour shows you the size of the effect. So the effect that the researchers were looking at, how large was the effect that they were seeing throughout the research. So you've got the light pink here is a small to medium negative effect, and this is a medium to large negative effect. So the way the researchers categorise these is that a small effect is only visible through careful examination, so if you're really looking hard for it. A medium effect is visible to the naked eye, again, if you look carefully, but it's obviously more obvious than a small one. And a large effect is easily seen because it's substantial, significant. You don't actually have to concentrate and focus on it in order to see it. So a number of different factors there. One of the interesting ones, and one of the reasons why I asked you about water, was the dehydration. So even a small drop in your level of hydration has a significant impact on your brain, on the ability to focus and concentrate. Even as much as 2% of your body weight, if you lose that level of hydration, it really has a significant impact. I don't know whether you notice this. It's something that I find if I'm really struggling to concentrate on something and I think about it. Oh yes, I haven't had any water to drink for a while. Anybody notice that? And it kind of, if you've noticed it, then perhaps you pay more attention to it. But other times, I find myself struggling to focus, and then I don't think about whether I've drunk anything. So even though you know, you don't necessarily bring it back to mind. And if you don't know at all, then obviously it's not something that even crosses your mind. And that's one of the things that we think is important and impactful about this research, is that it may sound obvious, but if people don't know, or they're not doing anything in these areas, perhaps water isn't made readily available in the workplace, perhaps it doesn't taste very nice, perhaps wherever I go for some water there's no cups or no glasses or whatever. And the other thing about hydration is that one of the impacts on your level of hydration is the dryness of the air. So if we've got air conditioning running and that's taking moisture out of the air, then the air in turn will suck moisture from your lungs and reduce the level of hydration that you have. So, even in those sorts of circumstances, there are things to be done to recognise that these are having a real impact on people. So a number of different things there. Sleep is a big one, and in terms of the noisy things, we've got speech here being the most impactful. The impact of music, you get a lot of people will put headphones on as a way of masking other noises going on. I think the jury's out on that one in terms of the impact of whether it's positive or negative on individuals. It seems to be a very individual thing. So those are the different factors that we found. And I guess you're probably thinking back to those 5 domains of the brain. So do these things impact on all of the different domains or not? Well, the answer is shown to some degree on this chart, which shows in fact, we've got 4 domains across the top because we've combined memory into that first one. The research that the researchers found didn't always neatly fit into the exact domains that we had from our colleagues at My Cognition. But you'll see, for example, that lack of sleep and lighting, for example, have an impact on all of those cognitive domains. So if you haven't had enough sleep, then all of those different activities are going to be compromised. And I guess you probably know that yourself anyway. But if you've had a really rotten night's sleep and you've got something which is very challenging to do today, should you really be trying to do that? Or indeed, are there things that you could be doing, should be doing, to try to mitigate some of the effects of that fatigue. Dehydration, again, almost all of the domains there impacted by hydration. And again, other things. Caffeine, well, let's hear it for coffee, has a positive impact and quite a quick impact on those cognitive domains. But of course, what the advice isn't to guzzle coffee, 15 cups a day or whatever. You still have to take other aspects of caffeine consumption on board. But, perhaps if you're suffering from lack of sleep and having difficulty focusing and concentrating, water and coffee, at least coffee in sort of measured doses exactly when you need it, might be the thing to do. So for us, this kind of started to make a lot of sense and was quite impactful in terms of thinking about the people in the workplace, because clearly there are a lot of things here that only we can do. We have to do some of these things for ourselves. But it started to also make us think, well, what are the things in the working environment and in the culture of the organisation that either reinforce some of these practices or cut across them? Because if I go back to my example of water, if the water is grotty and there's never any cups and we go into meetings and there's never a source of water close by, or the typical practice is we go into a 2-hour meeting with no beverages at all, then don't be surprised if people are kind of by the end of the meeting. So it sounds really obvious, but if I think as a consultant of all the times I've gone to client meetings where the catering budget's under a bit of pressure and so there are no refreshments, unless you're a real sort of influential external client, and yet arguably you're impacting people's performance by not providing these sorts of things in a way that encourages them and facilitates them taking them up. So do they understand it? Have you provided it? What can you do to encourage adoption? I think the jury's out on that one as well, because again, we're back to habits and behaviour, and it's not always a particularly easy thing. So that's the sort of the nub of the research. What I just want to reinforce before finishing is where this research came from. This isn't the result of a latest fad. It's not something we came up with sitting around in a focus group. It's not something that we sent out a questionnaire about and then drew some conclusions. We work with the Centre for Evidence-Based Management, who are based in Holland. And they're a network of academics, and we use them to go out and find all of the authoritative best research available, conducted anywhere in the world, on the subject of cognitive fitness. We defined it in a particular way. So the process is simply outlined here. We got very clear about what question we wanted to answer, and identified the sort of terms that we wanted the researchers to look for. They then spent a good while searching academic databases to find all of the research that had been done on looking at these sorts of things that impact the performance of the brain, helped with a lot of our definitions and our understanding of what influences what. They then, from that initial search, they then went through all of the papers in some detail to assess and filter it. So, does this research meet our criteria? They're very robust criteria. They want the research to be peer-reviewed. They want its methodology to be sound, so that it's the most robust, the most impactful research that we could find. Which kind of means that some of it kind of gets thrown out because it might look interesting, but it hasn't been done in a particularly rigorous way. There wasn't perhaps a control group, or the methodology in some other way was found to be lacking. So that's why when you saw the bubble diagrams, some of those circles were smaller than others, because the body of available evidence on some of those things wasn't as much as others. And that may also explain, for some of them, why you would look at them and think, well, why isn't there more on that subject? And again, perhaps some of the factors are more difficult to research than others. So throughout this process, the researchers have done all of the work up until this point. We then shared the research findings with our sponsors because they too have a role to play in interpreting and understanding the information and setting it in a context of what they as organisations are already doing and what they might do in the future. We then wrote some guidelines for our sponsors, one for individuals and one for organisations, to look at all of these different factors and say, well, if these things are really important, then what are the ways in which we could encourage adoption, make adoption in the workplace easier, and how can we start to think about the things that people do as individuals, our personal habits and practices. And the final step through all of this is to sort of take it all into the workplace and start working on how much of a difference if you put all of this stuff together. Because remember, these factors were drawn for a number of different research projects, so they haven't actually been researched all together. And what we're trying to do at the moment is to work with some small organisations to test this out, to actually use an assessment tool which our sponsor MyCognition has, which actually through a 15-minute test will actually measure the functioning of your brain in those 5 different domains. So we can take a look at how the brain's functioning today, make some changes along those personal habits or environmental conditions, and then measure it again, and to see what the impact has on people's performance. So that's the ongoing activity for us. Just to reinforce the research process takes huge numbers of studies and puts them into this big funnel and puts a ruler over them, all done by our researchers. So we and the sponsors can't influence the outcome of the research. We can't sort of pervert it or send it in the direction that we'd like to see it. So it's as pure as it can be, because obviously the Centre for Evidence-Based Management don't have any particular axe to grind here. They're just looking for the best research in terms of, as I mentioned, sample size, population, the design of the research, what measures were used, how large the effect sizes were. Because you can imagine that if you find a very, very small, tiny impact, then perhaps it's not going to be as impactful as something where it's immediately obvious what the impact is going to be. So, reinforcing the credentials of the research, these are some key people from the research team, and you'll recognise I am here. Mr. Mawson, my Managing Director, also a key person helping to direct the research. Eric Behrens, the Managing Director of the Centre for Evidence-Based Management, ran the research from their end of things, and we had access to the notable professors Rob Briner in this country, Denise Russo in the US. And also for this particular project, the people at MyCognition, who included neuroscientists and other notable people, experienced people from whom we could draw to understand some of this stuff. Because believe me, when you start poking around in the brain, all sorts of things come up, and you draw a conclusion, and then the neuroscientists will go, nah, you'd think that, but no, it really isn't worth it. Okay, so a lot of work goes into trying to understand it. So in conclusion, things that we've been talking to different organisations about in terms of this thinking is really, I suppose, starting to make sure that people understand the difference between general well-being and what's good for my brain. Do I drink water because I think it's good for me physically, or do I actually realise that it has an impact on my ability to focus and concentrate and do my work? And this is all about trying to ensure that people can bring their best brains to the office every day, which is kind of an interesting one, because I'm not sure that that's written into anybody's contract of employment. But as employers, that's really what you'd want, that people bring their best brain. through the door with them every day, and that you do all that you can to help them to keep it. So what things are organisations doing currently, and do they actually go out of their way to explain why? So if you provide something like free breakfast, for example, which certainly one of our sponsors was doing, and they did that for a number of different reasons, but actually if you think about it, encouraging people to eat breakfast at the beginning of the day ticks the breakfast box. So if you've rushed out first thing in the morning, haven't had time for breakfast, or you don't feel, some people feel nauseous in the morning and don't actually want to eat. Providing breakfast in the office allows them to refuel. If you think how many hours you might have been with no nutrition, no fluid intake, no nutrients, from the last time you had a meal the night before. It's a long time before breakfast time, even longer to lunchtime. And that's going to have a significant impact on people's ability to really, for their brains to be well fueled. The other thing about providing free breakfast or providing somewhere for people to have breakfast is it can reinforce the social aspects of working with a group of people. And what our sponsor was thinking was that as well as just providing this free breakfast as a perk, let's make sure that people understand more about the importance of breakfast and the opportunity that that breakfast event has for getting together at the beginning of the day with team colleagues. Some clients and organisations we know actually have their breakfast venues as a social setting, a domestic setting. So it kind of almost has a homely feel about it. So people go in and they all gather around the breakfast bar and have their breakfast before they go off for the day. So it kind of links into the social cohesiveness of the people that you work with as well. And I think the visibility is part of the education in quite a subtle way. So you're not wanting to ram these sorts of things down people's throats, but making sure that they know why those things are important is certainly an interesting one for us. So thinking about what can be influenced today or to be done easily that would make a difference. Some of these things are quite simple, some of them are more complex. If you think about noise, it's a perennial problem in large organisations, big floor plates, open plan offices. But there's lots that can be done around understanding of the impact of noise and what protocols can be put in place for people to help them to perhaps either manage the noise or to let them know where there are quieter places within the office. Some clients we have organise their space on a noise gradient so that, and help people to be mobile within the office so people can find the best place for the type of work and task they're trying to do. So I think what comes across in a lot of this research is that it's about personal perception. So if you think about temperature, it's one of those ones that divides the office, doesn't it? You've got people in fleeces and coats, and then you've got people, who are just kind of throwing off clothes, and they've got fans because they're too hot or whatever. You're never going to be able to deliver a consistent environment. But if people knew that there were other places within the office where the temperature was a bit cooler, because you've got some sensors there, or you've got different information to make available to people, then that's something that empowers them to seek the right conditions for them. So what's right for me might not be right for you. And being uncomfortable is the worst productivity killer, isn't it? If you're not comfortable, can you concentrate? Whether it's lighting, whether it's temperature, whether you're wearing the wrong clothes, I find it hugely distracting. If I'm not comfortable, I might as well just give up. Anybody else find that? Yeah, be comfy. So what can you do to encourage people to improve their brain power? It's an interesting concept because we floated this with our sponsors and we asked them, do you think you could ask your staff to bring their best brain into the office every day and make that a term of their employment contract or their psychological contract with you? They got a bit shifty. They said, I don't know about that. But if you think about it, if people have been out the night before, they've been up till 3 in the morning, they've been drinking, they're dehydrated, they didn't get much sleep, they're rolled in, no breakfast. Why can't you demand the best performance, the best brain to come through the door?
Yeah, but
Well, we don't, do we?
but what about the parent that's had the child up all night?
Oh, absolutely.
You know, I mean, that's one of the
Yeah.
biggest ones, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's not self-inflicted, but
No.
there's not a lot you can do about it.
No, indeed. And what can you do about that during the day? You know, one of the smaller bubbles on the map was daytime naps.
Yeah.
Well, how culturally acceptable are daytime naps? You know.
Chinese government mandate it.
Yeah. And some organisations we know have, I think probably Google is the one everybody trots out, don't they? Hammocks or sleep rooms or whatever. But boy, they have to be culturally acceptable, don't they? Because otherwise it's a bit like homeworking, isn't it? It's you're working at home, oh right, yeah, okay. You know, but if you're really wasted for a very good reason, like you say, you've got a child that's kept you up all night, or you've not been well, or any number of defensible reasons, what are you going to do? You're going to ask that person to carry on sitting at their desk, banging away, trying to get some performance or some productivity out of them.
You'll feed them with coffee and make sure they're not dehydrated.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, have some water. But again, it's the balance, I suppose, isn't it? And what would make daytime naps or providing somewhere for a nap, what would make that acceptable? Well, that's cognitive fitness. I hope you feel more cognitively informed than when you walked in today. I hope you found that of interest, and I hope the rest of the day is as successful as the morning. Sadly, I can't stay for the afternoon, but we are just about to start a blog on our website about this topic. So we're going to be sharing it with people over the coming weeks. So, but if you're interested in finding out more, then please have a look at our website at the blog. Thank you very much.